All right, that's starting now. And we'll be sent after the show with slide decks after the conference. So stick around for the Q&A as well. And we can, I guess, without further ado, go ahead and get started. First up, we have Ken Skistimas. Hopefully I didn't butcher that name from GE Digital. Ken heads up the UX and design language team for the Predix design system. So take it away, Ken.
Yep. Howdy. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. We'll get going. Hello, everybody. Looks like we got a pretty good selection of folks from around the globe. Like you mentioned, my name is Ken Skistimas. It's like Christmas, if you have trouble pronouncing it, just like it looks. I work here at GE Digital. We are in San Ramon, California. It's a beautiful day here. So we're about 30 miles outside of San Francisco in the Bay Area. If you're in the area, come by for lunch. It's nice out here. Before we get started, a little bit about me. This is me as a kid, obviously, under the car. I like this picture because it just kind of explains my mentality on stuff, right? I'm not afraid to jump in. I'm going to take things apart, find out a better way to reassemble them, really analyze the problems. You know, you can probably take a similar picture of me today when I'm outside, you know, working on the car or something like that. But, you know, I guess, you know, a little bit about my background here. This is what I call my t-shirt resume. So you're going to see a smattering of stuff here from over the years. I've worked on a variety of consumer stuff, you know, some music apps, some reading apps. I dipped my toe into style guides back at eBay, probably about 10 years ago, back when they were, you know, static PDF files. And then prior to GE, I spent almost 4 years at Salesforce, where I worked on Lightning design system. So there was a lot of, you know, a lot of core patterns I contributed to that, like page headers and layouts and preview panels. And that's really where I got a lot of opinions for how I think thought design systems should work and the methods it takes to get one off the ground. So at GE, I work on the Predix design system. This is our website. You can go check it out. This is where our components live and our guidelines and all that sort of stuff. I'll talk a little bit more about what Predix is in the context of GE in a little bit. And some background on our team. So my team is, you know, we're 5 designers, 7 design technologists, which is our word at GE for, you know, front-end developers. We call them DTechs here. And then we have 1 product manager and QA on the team. We're working with folks around the globe, right? So, you know, India, New Orleans, Chicago, Seattle, lots of time zones. Back of the napkin, you know, we probably support maybe 10,000 developers, hundreds of apps. You know, I haven't counted the number of teams, but there's a lot of scale there. And we're all, you know, the design system team is all here in San Ramon. We sit next to each other. Design is right next to dev. We plan quarterly, but we ship daily. So that means we can react pretty quickly when people ask for updates or changes. Generally have a pretty good response time, you know, within a day or two, we can make a tweak to something, or, you know, we're rolling out components all the time. And all our code is out there on GitHub, which is relatively unusual for GE. We're on public GitHub, so you can go out there and take a look. And, you know, in theory, anybody can contribute to the components. So today we're here to talk about consistency and flexibility, right? So since we're talking about design systems, I thought I'd use one of our components out of the Predix design system. This is our PX slider. And, you know, I think a lot of people treat consistency and flexibility at odds with each other. So hence the slider kind of makes sense. I'm going to talk today about how my experience at GE has made me rethink my assumptions about how these two work together. Like I mentioned, a lot of people I think come in and see these two at odds with each other, but really to have a successful design system that scales, you need to figure out a way for both of these to work together. So if you go back to our slider here, I think a lot of teams building design systems approach them under the guise of consistency, right? You've probably got a bunch of products, maybe there's some acquisitions, some legacy stuff. You want to unify all of that. And it's natural as designers that we look for ways to build visual systems. And, we want to build consistency. It's in our nature to go out there and make things look and work the same. Sometimes we focus on that too much, I think, and we start to overlook the purpose of the software we're working on. So sometimes it gets to be consistency for consistency's sake. But sometimes for those of us, like the team here, as a platform team, and we're a degree out from the actual end use cases in a lot of times. So we got to go out and, if we want to go on a site visit or get some research, it's a little bit of an effort to do that. But it's important not to lose sight of those. So a lot of times people jump into design systems and they're going to create, a new one or their company, and they'll approach things like this. You probably got, a bunch of different button styles. Like I mentioned, maybe there's some acquisitions. Maybe you've got like the rogue designer out there who, is like, I'm going to make the button my way. I mean, to be honest, back at eBay, that was kind of my thing. But, I think it's in our inclination to put all those together. And we unify around a button style, or a color palette, or a couple of page layouts. From the text perspective, we might do the same thing. A lot of teams, are built on various JavaScript libraries. So Angular, React, and Vue are pretty popular these days. You might find a design system that chooses one. In this case, maybe it's React or something. But it makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases. Different colors, a bunch of different nav bars, different action treatments. You sprinkle a little bit of design system dust on it, and there you go, like unified product suite. And this is really like the one ring to rule them all approach, and there's nothing wrong with it. It works for a lot of folks, especially for smaller companies, smaller teams. If you're starting out fresh, you're a startup, go for it. It makes sense. And it works a lot of the time. Like I mentioned, I've done it, in a lot of places I've worked. But as your company grows, as your products grow, as your design system grows, what does it look like? Is this still going to hold true? As you're, like at GE, we're across the globe, as maybe you have some acquisitions. Can you still go all in on consistency? So a little bit about GE. I came here in October of 2016. And I think it's funny, this is our office in San Ramon. I don't know whether that's John Paul, George Ringo in the front there, but that guy's doing his best Abbey Road impersonation. But I came here in October 2016, and a lot of people will, when you say GE, they'll think of like light bulbs and washing machines, right? You can still get them in the store, they're still out there. But by and large, this isn't really what we're focused on, especially at GE Digital anymore. So I work on the Predix platform. GE Digital's pretty well focused on the Predix platform. And what this is an industrial Internet of Things platform. And it lets you build applications to do things like monitor a wind farm or tell you when you should perform maintenance on this big machinery in your power plant, or tell a pilot how efficient their last flight was. So you might find us out, at a wind farm like this doing research, or you might find our software here. You also might find it, at a power plant. This is a turbine. This is the kind of stuff that we're gathering data from on a, regular basis here. And all this data has to go somewhere, and it goes to Predix. It has to manifest itself in a UI, and the UI is built with the Predix design system. A little bit of inside baseball. All those little circles there, those are all the sensors, right? So they're measuring things like rotation, temperature, vibration, pressure, and all that data goes into the cloud, into the Predix cloud, and then it will manifest itself at a UI, right? Maybe it's a chart that tells them, oh gosh, the rotation's off. There's a turbine blade that's, better do maintenance on it, or the temperature's too high, so the bearings need to be serviced. So if you go back to that kid, under the little car, when I was 2 years old, like, this is pretty cool stuff. Big machines are pretty neat. So businesses are design system support. So we have Asset Performance, which is the team I originally joined when I came to GE. And that's the one that would tell you when you need to do maintenance on your machines. Asset's just a fancy word for something you own, right? It's usually something big and spinny here at GE, like a wind turbine or a gas turbine that I showed. It could also be something smaller. We have the platform itself, which is all the tools you need to build an app. The power plant use case I was talking about. There's field service, so the guys that go out and repair this equipment. The aviation, wind turbines, transportation, manufacturing. So a pretty broad selection of stuff. And this is only some of it. There's also healthcare and oil and gas and some other stuff we do in here. And when I joined, this was the state of the design system. So we had 2 sites. One was a component library. That's the one you see on the left there. And the one on the right was design guidelines or usage guidelines, right? And it's possible when you came in, you knew one existed, you didn't know the other one existed. Some teams were using it, a lot weren't. Like the one I joined, it was kind of like, yeah, it's okay, but we can't really use it. And I was confused by that because where I had just come from, design system was top of mind for everybody. It was the hot thing. Everybody was aligning to the design system. And if you looked at the components, came in here, this is a data table, right? Obviously, they were pretty configurable. You could do a lot of stuff with them. And, based on my past experience, I almost thought it was too much. I was like, why are there so many configurations here? None of the data tables are going to look the same. So I found it a little confusing, and I was, immediately I was like, gosh, we can simplify this so much. Why do we need this many configurations? And the team was like, well, we support a lot of businesses, they need all this stuff. And I was like, really? Are you sure about that? So what I did when I got in there was, I jumped on the design system team, and around January of last year, we embarked on what we called the refresh. So we decided it was time to invest some in the design system, and a lot of teams have started using it. We were hearing, rumblings from across the teams that they couldn't use it. And I was like, okay, well, let's figure out why. And the first step to that was to look at everybody's work. So I hesitate to call this an audit. It was really more informational. It was like, send me everything you've got that you think is built on a design system, designed or built or otherwise. And what we saw was just, there was no consistency to it at all. And I was kind of surprised. And in a lot of cases, we saw stuff that wasn't even in the design system here. And people were like, oh yeah, it's using Predict. Like, that's not Predict at all. So, my impression was, it was like the Wild West. I was like, gosh, everybody's just doing what they want. Take this picture. Maybe that's my team there, my team. That burned out church in the back, like consistency. Like I didn't see it at all. It wasn't there. So I took a step back and I was like, gosh, this thing is so flexible. I don't even know if it's a system anymore. And based on my past experience, I was like, well, I know what to do. This works every time. Let's crank this thing down and make it consistent. We're going to pick the one nav, the one button, the handful of page layouts. We can totally do this. And then GE software is going to have one unified look and feel for it. And in order to do that, we had to learn a little bit more. We said, well, we've got to get everybody on board with this. So we scheduled a series of workshops. Wouldn't be a design presentation without some Post-its and a picture somewhere, right? So we did a series of workshops, and we focused on things like navigation and page layout and color. And I was pretty new to the company at this point, but it was totally eye-opening. Everybody's bringing their use cases in, or their mock-ups. We're doing a lot of sharing. And over the course of about a month and a half, it really opened my eyes to just the scale we're supporting here with the Predict design system. And the feedback from the people that attended the workshops was loud and clear. So we need more flexibility. And I was kind of confused. I was like, well, what do you mean? Because all our components are pretty flexible. There's all those switches on there. You can configure them any way you want. But let's take a look at what they meant by that. So as we got in and we learned about their use cases in their businesses, you might find a Predict app in a power plant like this, maintaining a fleet of turbines. This guy is clearly satisfied with our software. He's giving it a thumbs up, but he's on the floor, right? He's got a hard hat on. There's probably a lot of loud equipment around them, the safety gear. You got to, there's all sorts of stuff you got to take into account here. So that's just one environment, right? Another one could be an offshore oil rig or an airplane hangar or a machine shop, where you're repairing the turbines or the jet engines. There may or may not be connectivity, and sometimes the devices of the computers, aren't always cutting edge. Sometimes we get lucky and they are, but design system supports all the way back to IE11. So there's some older stuff out there. Could also be 300 feet off the ground. You're doing maintenance on that wind farm I showed earlier. This guy's, all strapped in. It's probably super windy up there. It's bright daylight. He's probably got a mobile device that may or may not have connectivity. He's probably more focused on on being safe up here than the software. So it's really critical that we get make it super efficient for him to get his job done. And on the flip side of that, our stuff can end up in a monitoring and diagnostic room. It's dark. There's a lot of screens. Totally different environment than the guy on top of the wind turbine. So between all those businesses, there was a ton of different characteristics between them. The person, if you look at this, the customers and personas, number one, are different, right? The person buying the software for a plant maybe that makes tires, is pretty different than the one buying the software that wants to make their wind farm more efficient. Likewise, the person that's responsible for monitoring the production of tires has pretty different goals than the one monitoring the wind turbine. And then we've got the different environments, right? I showed you the super sunny outside, really windy on top of the wind turbine, to the monitoring and diagnostics guy in the dark room, to the workshop, on the shop floor. Totally different environments we have to accommodate for, different lighting conditions. And then I mentioned different use cases. So even in a monitoring and diagnostics case, you have different level analysts who are looking at problems, and a tier one analyst, his job is just to vet, and then you might ship that up to tier two, and she might look at it, wants to dig in further. So she's going to need more charts and graphs to really understand what's going on there. And then on top of all of that, there's probably some legacy apps that have been sitting out there for a number of years and expectations around those. People have been using those to get their job done on a daily basis. So they develop habits and patterns and expect things to work a specific way. And then of course, all these businesses, they haven't been talking to each other. So there's different tech stacks behind them. If we're lucky, it's something modern. A lot of times it's not, which sometimes is good for us because then they can just modernize all at once. But it's just a variety of stuff we have to accommodate for. So if you go back to our scale here, if we crank it all the way down to consistent, like I've been doing, in the past of my career, no one's going to use it. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll fit the needs of one business, but they're all so different that, you can't really bank on consistency here. So if we take a step back and look at some of the things I picked up during that workshop, and you're probably looking at it and saying, gosh, my design system doesn't cover this much ground. But there's some things you can take away from this. One is configurability doesn't always mean it's flexible, right? So we have tons of components. There's lots of options to configure on there. But it still wasn't flexible enough for everybody that we brought into the workshops, right? They were really looking at the broad strokes of flexibility, and we were looking at the details. So building on that, don't get too lost in the minutia of a component as you're working on components for your design system. It's easy to say oh, wouldn't it be cool if you just flipped the switch and it did this or that? That may not be addressing a need for the folks consuming the design system. And, before you make those decisions, really get to know the use cases behind the requirements, folks coming to you for asking for stuff. If you're working on a design system team, you're probably dealing with a bunch of different teams across the company. Maybe not always familiar with the use cases. Dig in, ask why, ask who it's for, what they're doing, what their goals are for, and that's going to help you determine, how the component should work, and that sort of stuff. And finally, like, don't force consistency if you don't have to, right? It's going to cause people to dig in their heels. As we saw early on, if it doesn't work for someone, it's like any other product, right? You drop it and you move on, you find something that does work. And in the case of a design system, that means they'll drop the design system and they'll just go build something themselves. So be really mindful about where you're enforcing consistency. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So why doesn't consistency always win? So I walked you through this case here where I sort of had this revelation, right? I got everybody together at GE and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do what I've been doing before for every other style guide and design system I've ever worked on. I think we can learn some things from branding here. And shout out to Andrea on my team who enlightened me to these concepts here. But in the idea of branding, you have a branded house and a house of brands. So if you think about a branded house, that would be something like FedEx, right? You go to FedEx, whether it's FedEx Ground or Ship and Pack or just straight up Express, like it's always under that FedEx banner, right? It always looks like FedEx. You see purple in there somewhere, probably orange, usually it's green or something like that, but it's always under FedEx. And then you've got the idea of a house of brands. So P&G is Procter & Gamble. You probably don't have any Procter & Gamble toothpaste or Procter & Gamble paper towels at your house, but you've got Brawny and you've got, Crest. So they're independent brands on their own. And in between, you've got this idea of a blend, right? It's kind of a combination of the two. And Coca-Cola would be an example of that. Sometimes when you grab a Coke, it looks like a Coke. There's slight variations on it, like Diet Coke or Coke Zero. Sometimes it doesn't look like Coke at all. Like they've also got Sprite and Crush and whatever else. And I think for the our conversation on design systems here, we can take something away from these concepts. If you've got a house of brands, it's likely that you'd probably build different design systems for all that stuff. But in the sense of a branded house and a blend, there's something we can take away here. So think about the branded house, and in terms of GE, that might be a business like aviation. And inside of aviation, you would have a couple apps. You have a few apps, right? One to maintain planes, one for parts inventory. You might have that flight planning app. And you probably have some messaging also, like either notifications or emails or something about what's going on. And inside of aviation, all that stuff needs to work together. The person doing the maintenance might use the parts inventory app. Likewise, the person doing the flight planning might use the maintenance app to schedule when the plane needs to stop to have some maintenance done on it. So you'd want all that stuff to work together. It makes a lot of sense. So the case for going in on consistency here, really works. I understand it. And this has largely been, most places I've worked at over the years have approached it this way. But what if you have to support more than aviation? So let's take a step back and we'll look at what the design system supports here. So we've got aviation, and here's a handful of other businesses we support too, right? I mentioned that asset performance one, where you're gonna see how your stuff's working and when you need to do maintenance on it. You've got the power plant, transportation, so you're scheduling trains, and then aviation. And if you look at transportation and aviation, those are two totally different use cases. The person scheduling the trains is never gonna be rebuilding a jet engine. Or looking at the efficiency of a flight, and they'll probably never know the other app exists, or they don't care, unless they do like a massive career change at some point. But even then, those two are fairly separate, but they still live under the Predix banner. So we want them to have some similarities between them. Whereas if you flip it over and you look at something like asset performance and power, if you're in the power plant, you may use asset performance to see how your turbine's working. Not always, those two need to stand alone, but it's more of a dotted line between them, and they need to work together because you could buy them together and they need to work together. So there's gonna be workflows that cross between them that need to be the same, whereas transportation and aviation will always be different. So in a case like this, you really need a lot more flexibility to support all these cases. So takeaways from that, consistency is, if we take our kind of brand concepts, right? Consistency is simpler for a branded house. It makes sense. You've got one umbrella, everything lives under that. It should always, look like your company or work like you would expect it to work for your company. But when you start blending things and your company expands, whether it's an acquisition or something else, you really need to think about how you can be more flexible with that and where. And the way you do that is by looking at the workflows, right? Who's using this stuff? How do they expect it to work together? And I'm not talking about internal people. I'm talking about customers, right? End users who are buying the software. Like, look at how they're using it, and that'll help you determine where you can be consistent and where you can be flexible. Because they're never going to cross over. An example might be a software developer that was going to work a little bit different than the end user for some of our predict stuff. So it's okay that they work a little bit different. So now knowing all of this, if we go back to our slider, like we've had to find our middle ground here at GE. We had to find a spot in the system where it was flexible enough to address our customer needs, but still hung together and looks like a predicts application. And Big Lebowski is one of my favorite movies. He's got the rug in there. The rug pulls the room together. So how do we pull the room together for the predicts applications? We can sit here for a moment and have a moment of zen while he taps his finger. So the way I like to think about our design system is car design. I'm a car guy, so I'm always studying kind of what's coming out, and it goes back to the kid under the car again. But if you look at the family of like a car brand, and here we've got some Infinities, they've got vehicles that address different use cases. So you've got an SUV, you've got probably a coupe or a sports car in there, you've got the sedan for commuting. They all address different use cases, and they've all got a slightly different appearance. But they all hang together as Infinity, right? And there's unifying qualities between them all. You'll notice the wheels are a little different, but the shape of the grille is about the same. There's some body lines that are the same. There's certain trademarks that are there. And that's the way, we approach predicts. That's what we're shooting for. What are the qualities that will allow our apps to hang together, to look like a family? So we talked about the variety of use cases we've been supporting. Here's some example apps. I put these together with our sketch stencil, but they're representative of what you might find, right? On the left or the right, the variation. You'll notice the navigation is different between the two. There's different color breaks. One has charts, one just has numbers. This is the kind of stuff we have to address with those use cases I talked about before. So what's similar between those two? There's actually a number of things here. So first is our font. This is an easy one. A lot of companies have a corporate font. GE's is Inspira Sans. We've been talking about flexibility and consistency. This is one thing we don't budge on. Every app needs to have Inspira Sans. But to build some flexibility into that, we've taken our CSS styles and built in some hierarchy. You can't use obviously one size font for everything. You want a little bit of texture and hierarchy in your page. So we built that into the CSS styles, which gives the designers assembling the pages some room to play around with how this stuff's going to work together and how you can address the hierarchy of information on there. We also combined our themes. So, like a lot of design systems, they have a light theme and a dark theme, and that works great for most folks. But as I illustrated, we've got a lot of different environments. Not only do we have lights on and lights off, we've kind of got this low light environment in there. We've also got a desire from business units to punch up the fidelity of the designs, right? They want more of a visual impact in there. If you're going out to sell to a customer, you're going to want it to look nice and sharp. And the folks using this stuff, using the software, the end users, they're the same ones who are going home and using consumer apps anyway. So they have the same expectations for the stuff they're going to, the apps they're going to spend 8-10 hours on a day, should should have the fidelity of the, you know, the Amazon or the Facebook or the Twitter or you know, whatever else consumer apps are using at home, if not better. And the other area we've got is we expanded our data visualization color palette. So while we've got, you know, our core neutral gray palette, we give people a lot of room to play with the data viz. That's a big use case across a lot of our apps. And we heard that people were hitting the ceiling. You know, we had, I think, maybe 20 colors originally for that. And when you're plotting all these data points from that big turbine I showed you, it's easy to hit the ceiling on that pretty quick. So we expanded those out quite a bit, which allows you to do things like this. You know, this is an example screen again, but you can be pretty flexible with your data viz. And you'll notice we've got different, you know, our dark theme isn't purely one color either. So there's slightly different grays in there. But the data viz color palette will let you go, you know, if you want to have a unique palette for your business unit, it's totally up to you to do that. Feel free, it's there for you to assemble as you see fit for use cases. If you want to go monochromatic, you can do that as well. And then mixing the themes gives you something like this. So, you know, if you've got the monitoring and diagnostics person, you know, in the low light environment, you might, you know, do something like on the left there. These are all the same screen. They're just different representations of how you can assemble the themes. So you could go all dark. If the information at the top of the page is more important for your users, you could highlight that with the dark region. Likewise, if the data viz is more important, flip it and you get more impact with the data viz being on dark. But it gives our teams a lot of flexibility to kind of assemble these pages as they see fit and give their own business units some personality while still hanging together as predicts. Spacing is a core tenet of the language as well. And we build that into the components where we can and the sketch stencils as well. So you grab a component, it's going to have the correct spacing in there. We generally, you know, lean on negative space more than, say, putting something in a box or a line break between it. It's just cleaner. It gives you, you know, you can use it to build hierarchy a little bit better, and you know, there's not a lot of cruft in the way. You can get to the information quicker. And then the thing our apps are always going to use is we have a, you know, signature style for our forms, and with that you get some interaction elements. There's some little bit of animation and transition in there. But if you grab the Predicts design system, you're going to get the same forms. And we've tested these too. We've done usability testing on these, you know, to ensure that, you know, tappable for the folks out there on mobile, you know, on the plant floor, and still usable for the, you know, same people up in the, you know, the oil rig. And then as we extended out our language and we built it out, we realized, you know, we needed a lighter icon language. So we were also hitting the ceiling. We were using a canned icon family before, I think, Font Awesome. And people were backing into a lot of metaphors. And also the style of the icon was really heavy and it was kind of small and it didn't really match our new language. So we said, okay, well, let's take the icons to the next level here. And you know, we come up with this line art icon, totally extendable SVG set. You know, where else are you going to go to get, you know, an icon of a turbine? We got to make that ourselves. We have guidelines on how to extend this. We welcome anybody to do it. We have about 180 icons now, you know, adding more every day. It's not a big deal to add them. We encourage teams to do it themselves. So all this comes together as the Cirrus design language. And, you know, side note about the name, I think, you know, I mentioned we kicked this effort off and we were calling it the refresh, the design system refresh. And it was always the refresh. And then at some point towards the end, my boss suggested we should give it a name. And, you know, I sort of rolled my eyes at it. But it's really been beneficial to give this language a name so that when we go out and talk to folks as they're either adopting the design system or updating stuff, we can say, oh, have you updated the Cirrus yet? And people know what we're talking about now. Otherwise, it's a little confusing. So something I alluded to earlier about how we ship things, we don't have a monolithic version of the design system. What was happening was as we rolled this out, people were saying like, oh, are you using Predicts 2.0 or 3.0? They were just giving it a version number. And it was confusing people because there actually is a, you know, platform version. And the way the design system works, it's not monolithic. So we don't have a version 2.0 or 3.0. Each of our components we ship daily, and they have different version numbers. So it was really a boon to come up with a unifying name for this design language. People know what we're talking about. So just something to consider as you all work on your own design systems. Then implementation, right? We talked about that earlier. A lot of design systems will hang their hat on one JavaScript library. You know, we support a lot of businesses. We can't necessarily do that here at GE. It's a big ship to turn. But the way we get around that is we write all our components as web components. We use Polymer, which is a small JavaScript library, to do that. But also we provide CSS modules. So if you want to adopt the system, you don't have to go all in on components first. You can grab the CSS, and that will give you your buttons and your forms and the right color palette. You know, and it won't look 100%, but it'll get you there. And this has been pretty successful with acquisitions. They'll come grab the CSS, style things, get it in the ballpark, and then start dropping in components along the way. And what Polymer gets us is the ability to work with any other JavaScript library, be it Angular, Vue, React, or whatever framework of the month is out there. You know, it's the teams here generally don't have you know, a technical mandate, so it's not uncommon to find, you know, one business unit going all in on Angular and another one experimenting with Vue. We need to work with that, and you know, if we went all in and said, okay, you know, everybody has to use, you know, this one JavaScript library, the dev teams would dig their heels in because there's a lot of tech debt to update that and move that, and say, well, what's the benefit? We're already invested in this. So we make an effort to be really agnostic when teams come to us, so much so that we've actually built sample apps to show how our stuff can work in Angular and there's a lot of flexibility in that system. I don't know if I want to build in that much flexibility in there. Like how can we keep it from getting back to the Wild West? I don't want the church to burn again, the church of consistency, right? So one of my things is like it's not really a thing in a design system unless you've written it down. So we make a pretty strong effort to write down best practices and guidelines for how to assemble our stuff. We do this not only for design. So here you see some best practices for color usage. We've got them for data visualization, forms, whatnot, just how to, you know, baseline for what we've learned our best practices and how we think our design language should be used. But it's also important to think about this from a technical perspective. So we've got, you know, probably more developer guides and design guides on the site. And it's basically anytime anybody comes to the team and asks a question, you know, if we hear it more than once, we'll write it down and make a documentation out of it. And it gives you a point of reference from people come to you. And you know, a lot of times you'll find people going off the reservation because they don't have this point of reference. And if it's written down and you've got, you know, a URL you can send them or some sort of documentation, it doesn't have to be on your site. You know, we started a lot of the stuff as box notes internally that we could share out. But as long as you've got something for people to start from, that's already going to keep people on a more consistent path. And building on that, you know, you want to make it as easy as possible for folks to get on your design system. So, you know, if there's a lot of friction getting on there, like I mentioned, the JavaScript libraries has been kind of a contentious point for us. We have to reduce that. And you can reduce that by rolling out reference implementations. So, you know, here, this is our reference app, or our sample app. As we were getting all our components updated, we had people asking us, you know, well, how should I assemble these things? And we had a Sketch stencil, but not everybody can look at that, right? Like if you're a developer, you probably don't have Sketch. So, you know, we took a little bit of time and assembled an app to show just general guidance for how you should put together your nav and your breadcrumbs and that sort of stuff. And you can go grab that. Just go into Git and clone it, and you know, you can start working from that. And what's great about that is, you know, when people grab this, they're basically taking the way we think something should be built from the team, right? You know, the design's in the right place, you know, the assembly's right, you know, the code is starting from a good point, and they're taking that and it's all about this path of least resistance to get people going. Whereas if you said, yeah, there's our stockpile of components on the site, just go grab what you need and get it going, who knows how it's going to get assembled? And you're probably going to have to circle back later on and see if it's matching the guidelines. We do the same thing in our sketch stencil. So we have a variety of page assemblies in there for people to grab. These are based off of common use cases that we've seen across the board. So they not only are they different layouts, but it's also recommended color combinations and assemblies in here. So if you're a designer and you want to get going, you can grab this without starting from scratch, and you've got the right spacing, you've got the right layout, you've got the right color combos in there. And you're up and going a lot faster. So there's benefits on both ends. One, it makes the designer more efficient, but on our end, from the design system, it proliferates our way of thinking and keeps people more consistent, because they're always going to work from something that's there. If you dig a little bit deeper into the sketch stencil, you've got symbols, right? We're a pretty small team. We don't really have the ability to build special tools for designers, do things. So we're working with what we got here. And so we put a lot of effort into building our symbols to maintain parity with what the shipping code is doing on the site. And why we did this. So going back to our previous stencil, it was built in Illustrator, and there weren't any Rails on it. So if you remember, I did that audit, and everything looked different, right? And a lot of the reason that looked different was because people were taking the Illustrator file, and it was a free-for-all. Like they were just taking components, and if it didn't do what they wanted, no big deal. We'll just draw something else in there and make it. So we're really trying with the sketch stencil to keep a one-to-one with what's shipping out there, because what happened before was designers would go out there, break up the components, make up new functionality that didn't exist, and then the dev teams and their product teams would come back to the design system and say, hey, your design system's horrible. It doesn't do this. Say, well, of course it doesn't. That's invented. You never asked for that. So by relying on symbols in our sketch stencil, you can see here, like even down to the colors that you can use. Those are all the same SAS values that a developer would see. And everybody starts speaking the same language then, right? We take a lot of effort to make sure this is a one-to-one, so people don't go off the rails. So summary here for maintaining consistency, right? You want that path of least resistance. Make it super easy to get up and going. And to some degree, you got to do it on everybody else's terms. It's a lot harder if you throw it on the law. People will dig in their heels. You got to meet in the middle in a lot of cases. And the more barriers and requirements you put in front of people, the more likely they'll be inclined to go off the reservation. And that's not really good for anybody, right? It kind of defeats the purpose of a design system. So don't make it an uphill battle when you're doing this stuff. Don't let pride get in the way. Like, listen to your organization and how people are working. And adjust. It's like any other product you've got out there. Document, right? That'll just give you a repository of stuff to point to. It's both design and dev are super important. Get your thinking out there. People can't read your mind. So it's critical that you publish this stuff. How you think, publish your opinions on how you think apps should be assembled, how you should use the components. People will use it. And give people a reference point to start from. I talked about the sample app and the sketch stencil. It's all about that path of least resistance and getting people up and going quicker. If make it so easy to get started that it doesn't make any sense to go any other way. And then finally, guidelines aren't rules, right? So I think sometimes design systems are if we go down to the consistency again, like you're inclined to like throw down, like, oh, I didn't do it by my rules. Don't treat them that way. Like, they're just guidelines. That's what the guide in there is for. Have a conversation about it. We do office hours. People can bring in their work, and if something's not matching or if our guidance is a little off, we'll adjust it. So I think it's important to be a little bit loose on those. And it's okay, you know, there's some stuff, right? Like our font is a thing, or if you use, you know, a crazy color combination, we're going to call you out on it. But if you have a good reason for it, we'll also listen to it, you know, and we'll adjust accordingly. So that builds on my last point here. So, you know, something I was thinking about all these ways to build consistency, and there's a lot of tools in there and a lot of process. I was like, you know, and I did my dry run with the team the other day, and you know, our team member was like, well, you know, what about trust? You mentioned a lot about trust, and said, you know, I started thinking about that, and I was like, you're right. So I think it's important for design system teams to be open, you know, share work in progress, and include your customers, right? We do regular office hours twice a week for designers. Anybody's welcome to come. We have contribution meetings. We're constantly sharing out our roadmap. We're doing road shows, workshops. We'll embed with teams. Like, it's important to be there and be part of the process, because that'll make people invested, right? And you know, when people trust the decision making behind it, they're going to go with your decisions, and that'll build consistency. So, you know, don't be afraid to share in progress work as we're writing guidelines or building new components. We share that stuff out there. It's all available for anybody to look at. And that'll, you know, likely at some point snowball, and you'll start getting contributions. And you know, our contribution process here has been really interesting. When we started, people were bringing stuff, you know, and it was just things that they had built that we hadn't seen, and they hadn't socialized with us. And, you know, to be honest, it was off the mark. But as we've opened our process and shared kind of our point of view on stuff, that's gotten a lot closer, and the contributions have gotten a lot smoother. I've got the screenshot of our, you know, our Predicts UI stencils. This was back when we were doing that effort with all the workshops. We put out, you know, an initial sketch stencil for exploration. You know, the stuff wasn't done. It certainly, you know, wasn't even close to production ready. But the idea was, we're gonna throw this out to the community. You guys try to break it. And also, if you have ideas for how to improve it, send that back to us, and we'll roll this in, because we haven't coded any of this yet. So I think it's really important to encourage that kind of collaboration with your teams, and just keep that dialogue going and share ideas. It's going to make for a better design system. So wrapping up here. If you back up to the beginning there, you know, I showed the component, our data table component that had all those switches on it and configuration. That doesn't always mean your design system is flexible. You know, the folks consuming our design system, you know, we're at a higher level than that. Their expectations for flexibility were different, and it was based on their use cases and their customer requirements. You know, and the customer requirement wasn't always, you know, make a data table striped or not striped. It was broader than that. You know, to scale, you've got to have both. As you grow, as your team grows, your company grows, you're going to need to find a way for consistency and flexibility to work together. And then to do that, look at how people are using your products. Like, it's super important to be plugged in to how the stuff's being consumed in applications and by end users. By paying attention to those, there'll be good signals for where you can, you know, break consistency, or where you need to go all in on it. And then that path of least resistance, right? The easier you make for people to get up and going with the design system, it's going to encourage consistency and adoption, right? If you make it, if it's a tougher hill to climb, you know, you've got a lot of selling to do, you know, your adoption is going to falter. So make it as easy as possible for folks to get up and going. You know, by using the reference app, or, you know, adding in the layouts in your sketch stencil. Put your opinion out there, and you know, if you open the process, like I mentioned, like, it builds trust, right? So people will trust your opinion, and they'll also feel like they can give input too. You know, you're not this monolithic team that you have to go up to the mountain and get their designs approved. It's a conversation. It's always a dialogue. So super important, and that's one of those, you know, it's not a tool necessarily. It's just a way of thinking, and I think it's critical to build buy-in for the design system. So that's our story. Hopefully you all can take something out of it. for your system that you're working on. If we go back to our slider here, as you look at your organization, you might be more on the consistent side. You may find yourself sliding more to flexible. We try to ride that line right in the middle. I think there's a lot of stuff, you could learn from our experience here. From my experience, I certainly had a revelation as I jumped into GE, thinking I could go in all consistent. Turns out, not so much. You got to pay attention to the way people are using your products and what your use cases are, and what your customers are asking for. So, quick plug, if you want to know more about our process here, I wrote a blog post on it, bit.ly/GE-Cirrus. Give it a read if you want to know some of the gritty details on how we ran some of this stuff. And thanks for your time, everybody, this morning. This has been fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome presentation, Ken. Thanks again. So we do have quite a few follow-up questions, not so much time. So I'll do my best to get to as many as we can. And then in the meantime, we can always, we'll also run a quick poll here while we jump through the questions.
Sure.
So just go ahead and launch that right now. Awesome. Okay, so that should be live now. Just a quick poll to help us out too. So as that starts, I'll just go ahead and the first question we had has to do with evangelizing design systems internally. So question from Jeremy. How did you build the case for investing in and creating and maintaining a design system?
So there's actually a pretty long history of design systems here at GE Digital. And you can find a presentation, actually I think it was that the last UXPin, we kind of give the history of them, but it wasn't an overnight thing. And there were different flavors of it. This is the latest iteration, and it's picked up steam over the years. So, initially it was, I think, more of a style guide, and then it was built on Bootstrap. And then the last iteration of the Predix design system was really geared towards one product. And as folks started, the way we've approached it here has been more grassroots than anything else. So as people have seen the benefits and the efficiencies around it, it's gained more traction. I mentioned a lot of my talk about kind of throwing down mandates. And that's something we've kind of batted around here, where it's like, should we mandate the usage of this? And we haven't done that yet, because we feel like it's a lot stronger if it comes from the bottom up. It's a lot easier sell, right, if you get people on board with it. So we spend a lot of time out there connecting with the product teams. And if we find someone who's not using it or is skeptical of it, like, let's go have a conversation about it. And my main pitch is like, you don't want to be rewriting buttons in navigation in page layouts over and over again. Like, we've done all that stuff for you, so you can concentrate on the hard problems. And that usually rings pretty true to people. And then at the executive level, if you can show, the efficiencies of how you can ship things faster and how this operates at scale, that's always a home run. So yeah, it wasn't overnight here, and it's been, certainly iterative over the last, 4 or 5 years.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Another question. So how are you or the design team communicating adjustments or updates to the design system to users?
Yep. So we keep release notes on the site, but we do regular emails too. I think probably more often than not, we spend a lot of time on our internal Slack channel announcing stuff. We've got about 600 people in there. And so you see a lot of requests come through there for asked, but it's always something we're working on, how we can more broadly communicate that. One of the ideas I've been thinking about is we've got enough traction lately where I think we could do a quarterly design system all hands, right? Or you could get everybody together and say, here's what we're doing, here's what we're thinking about doing, if you want to influence our roadmap. So it's a number of channels how we do it. And GE is so big that there's always someone, who comes out of the woodwork and it's like, oh, I didn't know about this. When did you release that? So, and then you just kind of adjust accordingly then. But it's a combination of stuff like email, Slack, on the site also. And we just try to get the message out as broadly as we can.
Definitely. Awesome. Another person asking, so curious about your design documentation process. How do you document this without turning it into an eye-rolling, soul-sucking process that nobody wants to do?
There's always going to be a certain amount of, I guess, well, I don't want to say soul sucking because I actually enjoy it. And I think that the eye rolling part is the part where we don't want to be. You don't want to come off as these conflated, high on the mountain design team throwing down, this is the way it's got to be. So we try to write our guidelines in a way that are consumable for folks, and not really preachy. But yeah, it's hard. You got to make time for it. Like I said, a lot of times we'll do this. People we hear the same question a lot. So it's like, if you write an email, there's your baseline for your guidelines, right? You write an email back to someone, or you write a Slack reply. Take that and start from that. You got to start somewhere, and we'll throw those generally in a box document and, noodle over it a little bit. And then, my thing is also like, just get it out there. Something is better than nothing. And so, push it out. But yeah, it's tough. You got to dedicate time to it, and it's easy. It's one of those things that can get pushed to the bottom because, as designers, we'd rather be, designing stuff. But for the design system team, it's critical to document that. So start from what you got. If you reply to someone via an email, that's a good place to do it. Or, if you have an internal chat tool or something like that, and just kind of catalog that stuff. So it doesn't have to be this, grinding work to, I got to write a guideline,
Definitely, yeah. I think it can just be intimidating at first. So thanks
yeah,
for
I can't
that.
nothing. I think I wrote our base guidelines right before we shipped the update in July. I wrote them all in about a week, and that was really painful. And I learned a lesson from that, where it's like, okay, we should do this a little bit at a time.
Awesome. And then a few people were asking about the Polymer design, as far as like how to use Polymer to build those library agnostic design components. So maybe you could talk a little more to that.
Yeah, I mean, so Polymer is a JavaScript library. It gives us backwards compatibility for browsers that doesn't support web components, for one. And you could build your app entirely in Polymer, but there's also the ability, and the latest update of Polymer 2. For those who don't know, Polymer comes from Google. But the latest update has actually made it work a lot easier with, Angular or React or Vue. And we have to do that. Like, if we go back to the history of the design system here, I think we're a little ahead of the curve on web components. It's been great. I'm so glad we invested in it. But it was a little bit of a hard sell at the beginning because the earlier versions of Polymer and the older versions of Angular didn't work together. So that set folks up. There was a perception where it's like, oh, I can't use this. So we've taken extra attention. We've got, the DTEX here, take a lot of effort to show how these things can work together to combat that, misinformation out there. So we build the sample apps. You can go grab that code. And we also have built some advocates within the company by opening our process. So when someone says, oh, I can't get this to work with React, we can point to someone and be like, oh, they're building their app in React, and here's how they've, made it work with Polymer. But it's been super flexible for us.
Awesome. One more question, kind of a follow-up question on that. So how do you get alignment with design and development so that there's not too much distinction between, design or development, what you're documenting out here?
Mm-hmm. In the sense of, well, it's really easy in terms of our design system team because we're all sitting together, right? So super collaborative. If when we're working on something, we can, any one of us can check out code or commit code, and if we have a question or something's not working or one of our designs needs to be altered, we just turn around and talk to each other. What I found for design system teams, a good role for us to play as you get out into the broader company is to be that catalyst to get folks talking, right? So we've got, if you look at the design system, it's a design and technical solution for folks. So getting people in a room and using the design system as a lever to have that conversation between, your dev lead, your product lead, and your design lead via the design system is a good way to do that. And it also gives you a lot of good information, back channel. So there's benefits to both ends where you can learn more about their products and where they're at. And also you can facilitate the conversation on there, and which is why we do things. We'll go work with teams to do workshops, or embed ourselves for a little bit and that sort of stuff. So we are spoiled on the team here, though, that we're all in the same area. But it also makes for kind of a nice hub in the building here. We've got, I think, about 45 designers scattered across teams, and so you see a lot of traffic through our area too, both design and dev. People know where we are.
Definitely, yeah. That must be nice to kind of sit together there. So cool, that helps. One last question, unless we have more time here. So let's just try to pick one here. So you mentioned that you don't have too many tools to match the production environment, so you use symbols for that purpose.
Yep.
Would you be open to change your current way if there would be a way to get your designers closer to design and production?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've seen a lot of the tools coming out there where it's like, your sketch file produces code or vice versa. Something we've kicked around. Ideally, we get to a point where designers are using actual components in a design system to do things. You don't need this middle ground of a sketch or whatever else. We're always looking at ways to do it. We just have to be mindful of our priorities with the team. We're fairly small. We support a lot of stuff. So for the interim here, relying on symbols inside of Sketch was a great leap forward from where we had been. So we'll see what's next. We're always listening, and some idea will pop up, and we'll see what takes hold.
Awesome. Well, I know that we're at the top of the hour here, so I guess I'll kick us off, and we'll be ready for the next webinar. But just wanted to thank everybody again for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Ken.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.